escalating conflict between Israel and Iran, now entering its seventh day. Middle East Forum's Iran War Monitor has released its comprehensive battle damage assessment for June 17th and 18th online at iranwarmonitor.com. And this is a brief overview of the headlines. Tonight, we examine how Israeli forces have executed their most comprehensive military campaign in the nation's history, combining precision airstrikes, sophisticated cyber warfare, and apparent ground operations that have fundamentally changed and altered the balance of power in the Middle East. The systematic nature of these operations, coupled with Iran's increasing desperate responses, suggests we are not witnessing not merely another round of international conflict, but a transformative moment that will reshape Middle Eastern geopolitics for decades to come. Let me begin with the most significant development, the systematic elimination of Iran's military leadership. In a strike that demonstrates exceptional intelligence capabilities, Israel, as we reported yesterday, has taken out Major General Ali Shadmani, who had assumed command of Iran's Qatam al-Arabiya central headquarters just 4 days earlier. This facility served as Iran's emergency command center, the nerve center for all military operations during national crises. This precision of this strike, particularly notable given that Shadmani's predecessor, General Ghulam Ali Rashid, was eliminated in the opening hours of the conflict. The targeting has extended far beyond individual commanders. The Imam Hussein Officers College in Northeast Tehran, which serves as the primary training ground for Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps command staff, sustained direct hits during regular academic hours. The Law Enforcement Command, headquarters in Tehran, Iran's primary law enforcement training agency responsible for maintaining domestic control, has been severely damaged. In Isfahan, an entire IRGC command structure was reportedly eliminated at the Ardistan headquarters, including 5 senior officers whose names Iranian sources have specifically identified. And turning to Iran's nuclear program, the International Atomic Energy Agency has now confirmed what initial reports suggested was possible. Israeli munitions have successfully penetrated the heavily fortified underground centrifuge halls at the Natanz enrichment complex. This facility, buried deep underground and protected by meters of reinforced concrete, was long reinforced and thought to be invulnerable to conventional attack. The IAEA estimates that thousands of centrifuges have been destroyed, what represents the most significant setback to Iran's uranium enrichment program since its inception. The targeting extends beyond enrichment sites to the entire nuclear supply chain. The Tessa workshop in Karaj, where critical centrifuge components were manufactured, has been extensively damaged. A research facility in Tehran used for manufacturing and testing advanced centrifuge rotors has also been destroyed. Without these facilities, Iran faces not only immediate loss of enrichment capacity, but also the long-term inability to manufacture replacement equipment. The precision required to identify and successfully strike these diverse targets across Iran's vast territory indicates intelligence penetration that many analysts considered impossible. The destruction of Iran's ballistic missile arsenal represents equally sobering figures. The Institute for the Study of War now assesses that Israel has destroyed between 35 and 45% of Iran's total ballistic missile stockpile. Over 200 missile launchers have been eliminated, with 80 destroyed in just 48 hours between June 16th and 17th. The Tabriz missile base in East Azerbaijan province exemplifies the thoroughness of these strikes. Satellite imagery reveals complete devastation. Storage buildings razed to the ground, access roads rendered unusable by precision catering, and vehicle tunnels collapsed to prevent any possibility of rapid reconstruction. Perhaps most remarkably, though, is that Israeli forces have conducted these operations while integrating sophisticated cyber warfare that has crippled Iran's financial infrastructure. The pro-Israel hacking group, Predatory Sparrow, executed attacks on Bank Sapah, Iran's oldest financial institution, with extensive ties to the IRGC, destroying databases and backup systems. But the most spectacular cyber operation over the last 24 hours has been the targeting of Novatex, Iran's largest cryptocurrency exchange. Hackers successfully exfiltrated over $90 million in various cryptocurrency, then deliberately destroyed these funds by sending them to addresses for which they demonstrably do not possess the private keys. The stolen assets and its addresses were done in such a way to create addresses containing anti-regime messages, transforming what would typically be categorized as cybercrime into an act of economic warfare. The hacking of Iran hasn't just been limited to its banks and to its cryptocurrency exchanges. Just half an hour, an unconfirmed report came of the hacking of the Iranian state broadcasting service's main satellite channel, where now if an Iranian is tuning in to satellite television, he will be seeing anti-regime messages rather than the propaganda that the regime has spewed since its inception. The Iranian regime's failure to respond to this is cascading, and it has chosen to impose a near total internet blackout, with connectivity dropping to just 3% of normal levels. This represents the most severe internet restrictions since the November 2019 protests, but with significantly more sophisticated implementation. The regime maintains a partial functionality for its national information network while cutting off the general population from international news sources and communications platforms. This digital isolation compounds the crisis unfolding across the country, where people are not able to obtain money from ATMs, petrol from gas stations, nor basic goods. The regime is starting to fall. The human cost of this conflict can also not be overlooked in terms of what the regime has done to people inside of the country. They're no longer allowing individuals to access banks in Tehran. They've encouraged individuals to not go to work. They've limited the amount of access they have food, medicine, and other material wares. They've even got to the point to start putting curfews in major Iranian cities. Despite these losses, Iran has still maintained the ability to carry out retaliatory strikes against Israel, launching approximately 400 ballistic missiles and over 1,000 drones toward Israeli territory since the conflict began. However, Israeli defensive systems have maintained an impressive 80 to 90 interception rate, transforming what Iran intended as devastating retaliation into a costly depletion of irreplaceable missile stocks. The IRGC's false claims of deploying the Fatah hypersonic missile capable of speeds up to Mach 15 continues to remain unverified, with no confirmed impacts from these supposed advanced weapons. At this point, the diplomatic dimension has also reached a critical juncture. President Trump has reportedly issued a 24-hour ultimatum demanding Iran's unconditional surrender and complete abandonment of its nuclear and missile programs. The activation of the U.S. Air Force's E-4B Doomsday aircraft, designed to serve as a survival command post during nuclear war, signals that American military planning has progressed beyond contingency development to active preparations for major combat operations. Trump's terse response this morning of good luck to the Supreme Leader's defiant statements, combined with his assertion that patience has already run out, indicates that the administration is moving rapidly towards military intervention. Khamenei's televised address from what appeared to be a temporary source, a temporary secure location, revealed both the regime's physical vulnerability and his rhetorical intransigence. The setting, clearly different from his usual offices, undermines his projection of strength and control. The IRGC's threat to American bases throughout the region, even if the United States enters the conflict, represents a significant escalation that could transform the Israel-Iran component of this into a regional conflagration. The international community also remains deeply divided. Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan has compared Israeli actions to genocide, while expressing support for Iran's so-called right to self-defense, placing NATO's second largest military in direct opposition to American policy. Conversely, German Chancellor Friedrich Merz has praised Israeli operations, signaling European division on the conflict. As we analyze these developments, several implications become clear. First, the systematic nature of Israeli operations demonstrates years of patient intelligence gathering and capabilities that few anticipated. The ability to simultaneously strike dozens of targets across Iran while maintaining operational surprise shows a level of military sophistication that will reshape our understanding of modern warfare. Second, the integration of cyber warfare with conventional military operations represents a new paradigm in conflict. The deliberate destruction of tens of millions and soon potentially hundreds of millions of dollars in cryptocurrency, the crippling of banking systems, and the precision targeting of military networks shows how both digital and kinetic operations can be seamlessly coordinated for maximum effects. And thirdly, and this will be the subject of our panel this afternoon, Iran's vulnerabilities have been starkly exposed. Despite decades of investment in missile technology, nuclear development, and defensive hardening, the regime has proven unable to protect its most critical assets or senior leadership. This demonstration may fundamentally alter regional calculations about military deterrence and strategic planning. Finally, the potential entry of the United States into direct military conflict represents a watershed moment. And to discuss this and more, we'll be joined by Winfield Myers, the editor of Middle East Forum Online, Eric Navarro, the Military and Strategic Affairs Director for the Middle East Forum, Jim Hanson, our Director of Washington Affairs, Dexter Van Zyl, our editor of Focus on Western Islamism, and reporting live from Jerusalem, Alex Selsky, the Director of the Middle East Forum Israel Office. First, thank you for our panel for joining. And even though we are still using some new technology, we're going to try to work this out. Everybody was able to hear the opening statements?
Yes, sir.
Okay, Anaf, you have to turn their mics on so we can hear them. All right, there we go. Okay, Jim, let's turn to you. The latest developments in Washington show that President Trump might be at the 1-yard line deciding whether or not to send American forces into Iran, or over Iran more appropriately. What's your take?
I think he is not quite to that decision point because all of the pressure and damage that you just outlined has crippled the Iranian regime. And I believe there is a chance, as I think President Trump does, they may capitulate. I don't know how or what that would end up looking like, or who's actually in charge at this point. Khamenei is getting a message out, but he no longer seems to be running things. So I think the president is torn between those who are telling him a final strike to get to the deepest parts of the Iranian nuclear program is necessary to ensure it can't go on. And on the other hand, people telling him that this is not our war, Israel's doing fine. And if the US gets into this, we may not get out. So I believe he's still hopeful for a capitulation. He gave an ultimatum. Thus far, I think the right thing to do is listen to what President Trump's saying, because he's not hiding it in diplo speak. He's speaking truth to them, and they ought to listen to it and pay attention.
Now, Eric, we spoke about this new version of cyber and kinetic warfare being joined together. What does this mean for the future of this conflict?
Yeah, well, it's playing out exactly how I expected. It's combined arms where you use all different instruments of combat power to achieve a desired result. In this situation or conflict, you're seeing more and more indirect or non-kinetic fires, like the state media being hacked with a deliberate message of uprising, right, directly to the people. At the same time, they're striking kinetically. At the same time, they're striking economic resources, all to bring the pressure onto the regime to bring it to a culmination point where hopefully the goal is to get the people to rise up and replace the regime. What Jim was talking about, I think President Trump is weighing not just the physical risks to U.S. personnel involved in any combat actions or in the region, but the political risks to U.S. involvement. He's getting significant pressure from members of the MAGA coalition that are saying that no regime change wars. Why get involved in another Middle East conflict? I disagree with all those critics, but he has to weigh all those different political factions and decide what the best outcome is or course of action for the country.
Thank you, Eric. Now, Alex, there's been instructions from Israel's Home Front Command indicating that restrictions are going to be lifted on the need for Israelis to stay close to bomb shelters. Does this mean that the Israelis are preparing for a situation where they're expecting less incoming Iranian rocket fire?
Hi, yes, it's very important to say part of the restrictions are lifted. We opened the possibility for people to go to work if they are close to the bomb shelters and they can get in the time that they have for that. We still close all the educational system, meaning the kindergartens and the schools and the universities. However, on the periphery of Israel, on all the borders, the restrictions are lifted even more, and we allow to have events up to 150 people in building and 50 people outside. However, within the center of the country, we don't enable any gathering outside and gathering up to only 30 people inside. So the lifting of the restrictions is small. However, you're definitely right. We see, first of all, second day that the volleys of the rockets get smaller. We had in the first few days with the volleys were of tens of rockets up to even 100 rockets one time, and now we see yesterday morning it was 3 times of 15, and this night it was even smaller. No casualties yesterday, no casualties today. Up until now it's 11:20 p.m. No sirens, which was, at this hour, usually at the first few 3-4 days, we had very heavy sirens at this hour. So people do feel that the threat is getting smaller, and people also feel that, and these restrictions definitely show, kind of resilience that we, can get a bit back to life. But however, we, on behalf of the Hub Front Command, say that the fact that we lift the restrictions doesn't mean that we will not, get back some of them immediately in an hour or in a few minutes or in a day if we see that there is a need. But overall, saying the atmosphere in the army, in the government, and definitely in the public is that Iran gets weaker, that it loses its ability to strike and to attack, and that Israel just continues to live its normal life after, if you would have told someone a few months ago that we would attack Iran and after 5 days we will not have, almost will not have rocket attacks, and we will lift restrictions and get back to work and cafes will be full in Tel Aviv, nobody would believe, but this is happening.
So Israel's waging a full air war over Iran, and people are going back to work. The stock market is up, and
The stock market is up.
and they're being told to go to a different place. That's a crazy story. I'm going to bring back in to this Winfield Myers, who has done really yeoman's work in publishing dozens of stories that have been coming out about the stories that we've been able to publish from Middle East Forum. And I think that's really important that you give us a little bit of a deeper level of analysis that's been happening with the conflict, so that you can tell us more about the intricacies happening inside Iran. What are some of the thoughts that policymakers outside the United States, Israel, and Iran are commenting on? And you have a unique perspective because you've reviewed dozens of pieces of literature in the last 24 hours. And I was hoping you might be able to share a deeper level of analysis of what might come next.
Sure. Thanks, Greg. We have published about 50 new articles so far since Saturday. So they're coming in fast and furious. There are more to go up. They're not all posted yet, but they will be soon. I think that what I would mention first and foremost are the several articles written in-house by some of our people, including Eric, who is on this broadcast, and Michael Rubin, who isn't with us, but who is an MEF analyst, and also one of our writing fellows, Hussein Abu Bakr Mansour. Hussein is Egyptian, and he has an outsider's perspective in that sense, even though he's lived in Washington for a long time now. So to go to your question about a little bit of a different perspective, they all three agree and argue eloquently and passionately, but also analytically, that now is the time for the United States to seize the moment to take advantage of this odd situation that you just mentioned with, as Alex told us, Israel conducting an air war over Iran at the same time the stock market is up and people in Israel are told they can go about their lives to some degree, and with a minimal amount of damage that has been done, not to overlook those who have lost their lives or have been injured. And the sense I get in reading all of these, as well as the other articles that have come in from wherever, from some people who are from Iran, others from various areas in the Middle East, is that Iran is uniquely weakened now, thanks to Israel's air war over the past several days, but also, of course, thanks to Israel's war since October 2023, when they have crippled Iran's proxies, which were always a sort of Damocles over Israel's head. Hezbollah, in particular, in Lebanon, always dissuaded Israel from taking this kind of action. That's gone now. The situation is radically different. I think if any of us had been told what we would be facing today, back on October 6th, 2023, we would be incredulous about that. We wouldn't believe it. Things could have changed so much. And in Hussein Abu Bakr Mansour's piece today, for example, it's titled "Why America Must Join Israel Against Iran." It's a fresh article out just today. He argues that it's, as Eric has too, that it's in America's best interest to seize the moment, not to dilly-dally, that to the swift goes the victor. What's the cliche? I mean, it's out of my mind, but when you refuse to act when a moment is right, historically and uniquely so, in the case of the Islamic Republic, which has been a curse to the West and to the Middle East since 1979. And I remember that. I'm the one who's old enough to have been in college at that point. And I remember very well the fall of the Shah and what I thought was the weakness of the Carter administration in not protecting him and not trying to do anything about it except launch one failed effort to rescue the hostages. And that's a long time ago. It's been a long time since I was 19 years old. And this has been going on since then. So the opportunity is here to, without massive risk to the United States, without massive risk to Israel, to cripple this regime and to forever, we hope, take out its nuclear threat, which has been really the overarching shadow of the Iranian regime for years now. It has gone toward this. So that's what our writers are saying. They also talk about the cryptocurrencies that you've mentioned, Greg, the blackouts for the internet, and we've had articles leading up to, before the bombing from Israel, noting the economic weakness of Iran, the rolling blackouts and brownouts in an Iranian summer because of the inability of Iran to produce sufficient electricity, and the cryptocurrency mining taking up such a huge percentage of that electricity, of the IRGC controlling so much of the electricity production that it's really crippled the country even before now. And now we see with Israel's actions that it seems to have been a lot weaker beforehand than any of us perhaps knew.
Well, I want to bring it back to Jim for a second, because we had a conversation yesterday on our broadcast at 4 p.m. What was President Trump going to be discussing with his top national security advisors at the National Security Council meeting? That meeting took place in Washington. There was a brief readout from the gaggle that there was a call between Prime Minister Netanyahu and President Trump, and that's it. And then the next statement that we hear from the president is that he doesn't necessarily think that his national director of intelligence is on the same point with him about the nuclear weapon and Iran's ability to go forward with it. We hear another statement this morning where he says that Ayatollah Khamenei is now Cryatollah. He gives him a nickname. I don't know if that moniker is meaning that he's taking it more or less seriously. But there's a lot of new developments that have taken place. So where is President Trump yesterday from where he is today? And again, take into consideration everything we've talked about, how likely is the U.S. to be getting kinetically involved in Iran?
Both sides of the U.S. argument on this weighed in, were heard, and he's evaluated them. But he still believes, and one of the things I was told he told Prime Minister Netanyahu is to keep going because it's working. So I think the idea that the U.S. needs to step in immediately is not there. And I'm going to make the devil's advocate view against U.S. intervention that he's hearing. And it basically boils down to the simple ones are he promised no more forever wars. He promised no more wars in the Middle East. And U.S. joining this can escalate it and also might bring in the other great powers. Those, to me, are the least compelling arguments against U.S. intervention. Because number one, President Trump didn't say we will never fight another war. He said we won't fight stupid wars. And this wouldn't be a war. This would be a short bombing intervention. But I think the number one thing he heard that is slowing him down towards U.S. intervention is we own this war as soon as we fly planes and drop bombs. It becomes a U.S.-led decapitation strike. So if the Iranian regime drops and a new one comes up, it was a U.S.-led regime change. And I don't believe, if possible, that is the best outcome. If we can do it with the Israelis already having done the damage and President Trump coming in as the peacemaker, that is a much better position for the U.S. And I believe that's where he sits right now, and why you haven't seen, massive ordnance penetrators going through the mountain at Fordo.
Let's see what President Trump said in a statement that was just released from the Oval Office.
He said I was going back home to make a ceasefire. Not a ceasefire. We'll long be on ceasefire. And I said, why do you say that? Why would you say ceasefire? It's a bad term to use. Because a ceasefire means like everything's going swimmingly, we'll take a little time off. It's not. We're not looking for a ceasefire. We're looking for a total, complete victory. Again, you know what the victory is. No nuclear weapon. So I thought it was a very badly worded statement by him, and obviously I let him know that.
So he says no nuclear weapon. He's looking for a total victory. Does he mean a U.S. victory, an Israeli victory, a victory of the West, a victory of the global position that nuclear proliferation should be stopped by the IAEA? What does he mean by total victory?
Yeah, you tell me, Greg. President Trump is notably cagey and smart and uses language as a weapon. He's an information warrior, and he's doing it right there because he brought all the things you just said into play. And everybody who has a stake in this game, which is pretty much everybody, gets to decide what he meant. I think the ones who really need to listen to him the closest is the Iranian regime. Giving up their nuclear weapon is the only way for the IRGC and the Ayatollahs to survive this. Absent that, they are going to be part of the rubble and wreckage. And I think that's what he's telling them.
Okay. Now, we've also heard new statements today from Russia, China, the United Nations, other European powers. Alex, I want to get your take on the view from Jerusalem, especially on an exchange that took place between Foreign Minister Gideon Sa'ar and the President of Turkey, Erdogan, in terms of how are other international powers now putting pressure on Israel to ask them to stop their strikes on Iran or to try to revisit the diplomatic solution. What's the take in terms of the diplomatic front lines?
Well, we definitely see a few days that many international big players react. And in Israel, the feeling is that Europeans, and many speak about it, that Europeans are very happy with the Israeli strike, and that we do the work for the Europeans, and they, as always, don't support us, and just with the double standards, attack us, even though we do see that Germany openly says, today the chancellor said that Israel does the work for all of us. The relationship with France gets worse and worse every moment after the French government closed. If you saw, there is a exhibition of the weapons in France where the defense weapons of one of the biggest Israeli producer, Elbit systems, were presented. And what the French organizers did, they closed the weapons themselves with a black wall, but didn't close the brand, so you could see that the brand is Israeli and it's closed. So after that, everybody, and definitely the foreign minister, attacked. And I saw the head of the Association of the the industries in Israel, and he called it, the modern Dreyfus case. So the relationship with France is getting worse and worse. We heard Russia, stating that, and threatening America. Well, I can tell you that it's whole, it's they will do nothing. The Russians, as we did our war game and our conference, Russian are the biggest benefactors from this conflict. They are happy with the prices. They will do nothing, and I'm sure that they will give up very easily. Iran, they give these statements for two reasons. First, for the domestic audience to show, few muscles, and to Iran to show them somehow that they support them. The Russians will do nothing. First, because they're not capable. Second, because they're not interested. And the new old player is the Turkey that says, the everyday more and more extreme things. Today, Erdogan said that, Netanyahu is worse than Hitler. I hope that everybody takes him seriously. And I'm sure that in Israel, people take Turkey more seriously. But again, I don't think Turkey will do anything. First, I don't think Turkey is interested. And second, I don't think that Turkey will really risk. I hope that they understand that Israel today is positioned as a very strong player. And I don't see Turkey doing more than just speaking. We see how Israel does in Syria.
What I want to do is I want to try to go on that point about Turkey and really go to a larger issue, which is, Turkey seems to be the big winner here if Iran is going to be taken out. But there's also some other side benefits that might be in terms of the regime's influence mechanisms. I mean, Dexter, I'm going to bring you in on here for a second. We've seen their banking system shut down, their cryptocurrency exchanges under attack, their satellite TV hijacked, and their internet now shut off. What does this mean for their attempt to carry out influence operations beyond Iran's borders?
Well, the only reason that their allies outside of the country have any influence whatsoever is because they can argue, look, if you don't do what we want you to do and what the regime wants you to do, you are going to put yourselves under threat. They're going to talk about it in the language of peace and justice, but it's ultimately appeasement. And the thing is that if the regime is destroyed, there's no need to appease it whatsoever. The irrelevance of the pro-regime activists here in the United States became evident the day after Israel started bombing Iran, with the National Iranian American Council. Its protest in front of the White House had only gathered about 20 people. And it was, frankly, it was just attended by people from Code Pink. It was like a dance class at an old folks home. Frankly, I hate to be so blunt, but that's what it was. And the younger people looked like they were the staffers trying to get a jazzercise class going. And the thing is that they tried to take advantage of like the isolationist wing of the far right and say that this is Netanyahu's war and this is Israel's war and this isn't America's war. But they couldn't get any traction. And the interesting thing is that about the most cringeworthy moment of it was when the leader of NIAC basically referred to, if you pardon the expression, asked whether or not President Trump was, and forgive me the language, was Netanyahu's bitch. And I hate to say that word, but that was what he said. That's not the language that you would expect to come out of the mouth of a think tank leader who expects to have any influence whatsoever over the Trump administration or over American foreign policy. They have pretty much realized that they have no influence whatsoever in DC. You don't use language like that unless you want to somehow incite the far left in American society and cause that type of trouble. But there was less than 20 people at this rally, and we've looked at the newsletters, the websites. The Islamists, for the most part, are quiet. They've been issuing statements, very few, but nothing really CARE has issued statements condemning Israel, but that's to be expected. But the only real people who are saying anything is NIAC, and they're not getting any traction. It's very clear. So
there's also some
if
other
there's
news
no threat, you don't need to appease it.
Thanks. Next, there's also some other news that's come out of this, Jim, and I know you've been following this pretty closely, which is the collapse of the woke right, if you will. You know, you have this clip that was posted by Tucker Carlson yesterday, an interview he did with Senator Ted Cruz, trying to give him in that gotcha game. What's the population of Iran? How many different ethnicities are there in Iran? And, you know, between you and me and our audience, there's some very good Iran experts working for Senator Cruz who give him great policy advice. But to expect the senator to necessarily know these very specific answers, maybe if you or me got caught by Tucker Carlson, that would be a gotcha moment worth repeating. But it seems to me that the sort of juvenile tactics that they're using in interviews with members of the U.S. Senate, with other elected officials, just shows how caustic and how benign and how marginalized their arguments are becoming.
I think it's dangerous for them to go ahead and take this antagonistic attitude toward President Trump's decision-making process. Because the fact that he is not simply following their advice, and I understand there are a lot of people, and these people are my friends. You know, I mean, I've been on Tucker Carlson's show, not since he left Fox, but a lot of the other people in that orbit, Bannon and the rest of them, are people I know well and I respect. But they believed that when President Trump was elected, it was an end to American adventurism. We would retreat beyond the oceans and we would never have to fight again. And I'm sorry, that's not the way the world works. Now, we do want to limit it. We obviously did some dumb things. 20 years in Afghanistan for a loss. You know, the Iraq war may have been a win, but in the end, the Iranian militias were triumphant a lot of places there. So I don't think the record of the United States in the Middle East is anything but dismal. But that doesn't mean that we can't look at the fact that a nuclear-armed apocalyptic death cult like 12er Shia Islam, as practiced by the Islamic Republic, can be tolerated with nuclear weapons. And President Trump is being, I think, very forthright in telling everybody, I will listen to you, but in the end, that is the red line, the number one red line. And I'm sorry if that makes you sad and angry, but I'm going to do what's right for the United States and put America first by ensuring we never see a mushroom cloud enter our, ports or wherever they might be able to get a weapon to.
Well, I think with that being brought up, we also should maybe share some more footage from the White House lawn today, where President Trump is asked specifically about what he knows about Iran. And maybe this is the answer he would give to Tucker Carlson if he was sitting across the table from him.
Talking to those around him, including his family members, his daughter Ivanka Trump, her husband Jared Kushner, after the swearing-in ceremony for Charles Kushner.
Do you have any intelligence that Iran is targeting? That Iran is targeting any U.S. assets?
We're doing very well. Thank you, everybody. Yes, Carol.
He says in that clip that when asked, do you have any intelligence about Iran doing anything to escalate its nuclear assets? And the president responds, if I had intelligence, I wouldn't tell you. It seems to me that there's some reporters are wishing that they're inside the Situation Room because they're just trying to to know what's going on in President Trump's thinking and what the rest of the cabinet is putting out forward. Eric, we're going to go to you for a second here because we have some questions from our audience. And this is a very specific question about arms manufacturing and supply and procurement. Stephen asks, what's the validity of the Wall Street Journal's report on Israel running low on Arrow interceptors? You have any familiarity with that?
Familiarity with the supply chain and logistics required to wage war over an extended period of time. There's a couple of things to discuss about that. One is, I believe the U.S. has already sent resupply, and based on public statements by President Trump, I see no reason where there will be a stopping of the resupply should the Israelis need further stockpiles. The other piece, though, is you always have to look at in relation to what. So Alex confirms what if you recall, we talked about in the first live streams, what I said was that the Israelis would target the air defense and gain and maximize air supremacy, and then they would systematically run sorties to destroy and degrade the missile capabilities of Iran over time. And that's exactly what we're seeing. The number of volleys is getting reduced as the Israeli, and by the way, as the Iranians launch, they're identifying the targets for the Israelis, and then they're getting taken out. Right. So at the one hand, yeah, the Wall Street Journal is trying to warn that Israel's running out of rockets. I believe that the U.S. will resupply. On the other hand, the Iranians are running out of supplies, of ballistic missiles, of launchers, of the infrastructure needed to continue to stay in the war. So it's all relative, and I believe that the Israelis and the West have clearly the upper hand in this conflict.
Right. And I also saw an interesting report that came out about the willingness of European countries to actually start rearming Israel with some basic defensive weaponry, which is a big contrast from the EU and from the UK's stance as relating to the Gaza war. So it seems as if though the other countries are now seeing, the Europeans especially, that Israel actually might have the chance to take out Iran's nuclear project. And as a result, could you actually be getting to the point where people say, you know what, we better hop on board this train, otherwise it's going to be too late. We're going to be on the wrong side of history, having allowed Iran to prolong its nuclear weapons program for so long until the Israelis were willing to do something, going back to the German chancellor's comments. But more than that, one of the things I wanted to ask Winfield was that when we have had some very specific coverage as it relates to the proximity, going back to Alex's points about the Israel-Turkish relationship, but also Turkey's involvement in Syria. One of the most quietest, sort of the most deaf silence that I've heard, or the loudest part of silence that I've heard, is the lack of Syria responding to anything that's going on in the Middle East. You have every Arab country right now having some sort of statement saying that Israel and Iran should go back to diplomacy, that they stand in solidarity with the Iranians, whatever else it is. The one country that hasn't made a peep in the Middle East is Syria. Why do you think that is?
Escaped the Iranian yoke in part. Part of the victory of the Sunni extremists who have taken over is, of course, at the cost of Iran, of being an Iran client state. Iran was responsible for the deaths of hundreds of thousands of Syrians during the civil war. They supported the Shia militias brutally, of course. Everyone was brutal. I mean, there's a lot of brutality in that horrible war. So that's part of it. The new regime is part of its foundation is anti-Iran. That's its reason for being. That's why it can exist, and that's part of its claim to legitimacy, is to throw off the Iranian yoke. And they're also just not in the position to do anything. There's a video I've seen on X, for example, that shows two Israeli C-130s, KC-130s tankers going over low, just a couple of 3,000 feet high, flying over the Syrian desert. And the only people that scared, the only thing that weren't people at all, the only things that were scared by was sheep running from the sound of the planes that came over. I guess the shepherd might have been, he must have been filming or videoing the planes flying over. So Israel has not only complete control of the skies over Iran, they have nothing to worry about by flying low over Syria either. They just can't do anything, and they don't. It's not to say that they want to. I don't think that the Sunni Islamists in charge of Syria are eager to see Iran victorious in much anything.
Alex, one of the questions that was asked by our audience member, and I'm pretty sure you probably can't answer this as specifically as he may want you to, but I'm going to ask you anyway, has there been any strategic damage to Israeli installations as a result of Iranian missile fire? And if so, what does it look like?
Nothing. The only thing that happened is that the oil refinery in Haifa is closed temporarily because one of the missiles hurt not the refinery itself, not any active part of it, but on the periphery, on the territory of the refining. but nothing is hurt. We don't feel any shortage in anything. No electricity. The only damage is a few buildings that were ruined by the missiles in a couple of cities, and definitely the biggest damage are the lives of the civilians. Only civilians were hurt. Only civilians were died so far, and we see that they target civilian targets. They try to target some strategic targets, but they fail totally. No damage to Israel whatsoever.
Thank you, Alex. I want to thank the members of our panel, Eric Navarro, Director of Military and Strategic Programs at MEF, Winfield Myers, our editor, Naf Column, our producer, Alex Selsky, the Director of our Israel office, and Dexter Van Zyl, the editor of Focus on Western Islamism. I'm going to ask Naf that we keep Jim on here because we have some updates regarding the provision of MEF information, and I'm going to ask the two of us speak about this. So thanks for everybody. Feel free to log off except for Jim and Naf. Then we'll get to our last updates. So Jim, one of the things that you've been doing in DC is you've been providing information to members of Congress and to members of the executive branch as it relates to the activities that are going on in the region. And one of the things that I think is important to note is that there is interest in Capitol Hill for things that they can do, asks that they have made of you of saying, you know what, I'm sitting here in DC, warfare is going on in the Middle East. Even if American fighter jets are flying over there, I want to be able to do something. And my understanding is that the Middle East Forum this morning launched a brand new campaign relating to banning and designated Iranian militia organizations or Iranian-backed militia organizations in Iraq, and asking Congress to put them on the U.S. foreign designated terrorist organization list. Can you tell us a little bit more about that campaign?
One of the downsides of the end of the Iraq war was the infiltration of Iran into what's known as the Popular Mobilization Forces. They're the militias that are spread all across the country of Iraq. And the Iranians poured tons of money in from their benefactors and basically bought the loyalty of those militias and have used them as terror proxies. They're the ones who, when someone is shooting rockets or attacking U.S. forces there or in Syria or even the time in Jordan, it's those Iranian-backed militias that have been the problem. And there's a large number of them. And Congressman Stubbe had contacted MEF and asked if we could help with their effort to go ahead and designate those organizations and try to shut off their ability, because even though they have quasi-legitimate status because they're part of an Iraqi militia conglomeration, we can still designate them and go ahead and make it difficult for anyone to go ahead and get money to them, but especially the Iranians. And so that's part of the effort that we're working on right now.
So if people want to get involved and want to sign up, they can go to the website, meforum.org, click on the Action Center, and they'll be able to see this new MEF Action Alert, which asks our followers, readers, and our viewers to tell Congress to designate Iran's proxy militias as foreign terror organizations. They can sign up with Facebook. They can share their information online. Are there any other campaigns that we're asking our followers to adopt?
I think right now we'd like to focus on that one because that one seems to be a no-brainer. Because the nice thing about this is the threats that Iran has left that could actually damage us. And whether we bomb or not, they already blame us for this. All right, so it's not like they're saying, oh, well, the United States gets a pass because Israel's doing this. No, Israel's the little Satan, we're the great Satan. So we're partners in this regardless from their perspective. So what we want to do is limit their ability to do any damage to U.S. forces. And if we can mitigate any ability for those militias to conduct attacks, that's an advantage that saves U.S. lives. So I think please go to the MEF Action section on our website, send your Congress. It's very easy to do. You send a message to your congressperson telling them that you want this. And I think we can gain between that effort in Congress and between we're taking this straight to both the State Department and the NSC to explain to them, and they are very aware of this. but we want them to know that the American people want this to happen, and we can get it done. If we can get it done immediately, it's something that could actually save American lives in any potential Iranian response.
Now, Jim, you've also been responsible for putting together the Iran War Live blog, which is a news section of the website where people can get up-to-date information, not where the bombs went, not where the missiles were launched from, but something a little bit more current about what people should be thinking about this, what they should know about, as we said earlier in the broadcast, a deeper level of analysis of what these events mean. Can you tell us a little bit about the blog?
Yeah, the blog, where there is so much, I am constantly stunned by the amount of quality information the Middle East Forum has been producing and putting out. And especially now, it happened when October 7th happened, we went into wartime mode. It's happened again. And as Winfield noted, there were probably 50 pieces in the last few days. And these are not op-ed pieces. These are deeply researched pieces by experts, many of whom are in the region, who are putting out on the ground truth and information that people can't get anywhere else. So we decided they're being published at the website, but we wanted to add some updates I can bring from DC, add from the Iran War Monitor, which you're publishing, the battle damage assessment that you opened the program today with, and things like that, and collect them all in a rolling live blog status, so people can just go there, see what's happened, and then click through and get the full information. And it's like pedaling as fast as I can to keep up with what MEF is doing. But I'll tell you, that's a great problem to have, because I know there are people in the administration who are looking at this and using this as a tool, because this is information as good as they're getting from anywhere else.
And have you heard any feedback from members of Congress, from other members of the administration, that the U.S. government is actually reviewing MEF's materials?
They have been reviewing them since day 2 of the administration, when we were involved in helping stop USAID from funding terrorism. Now we're stopping DHS and FEMA from funding terrorism. And in this situation, where it's a rapidly fast-moving, evolving environment, they'd love to have information that comes from sources different than they have inside. So yeah, they are thrilled with the idea that accurate, rigorous, academically, accurate information is available to them.
Well, it's good to know, Jim. Thank you very much for joining us today, and look forward to having you tomorrow whenever we have our next broadcast, when these little purple trails going on whenever end up finding their way off the screen. So, but I think for a first broadcast wasn't that bad. Let's just see if we have any more questions from the audience we might be able to answer. Could MEF start a campaign for U.S.-Israel to impose directly a regime change and establish a transitional replacement regime and a process for establishing a legitimate regime? You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to save that for the topic for tomorrow's broadcast. And Jim and I will get ready for this after the broadcast. We will ask the question, is regime change possible in Iran as a result of the ongoing campaign by Israel to eliminate Iran's nuclear infrastructure, their ballistic missile programs, and demand that they end their support for proxy terror organizations? So, Jim, I'm going to say thank you. And to end this broadcast today, Naf, if you wouldn't mind just pulling up as a stinger the meforum.org website, so everyone knows where to get our information, and also our email address in case anybody needs to be able to get in touch with us, info@meforum.org. If you have any questions for us, for any of our staff, or any of our fellows, please feel free to send us an email, and we'd be glad to get back in touch with you. Ideas for future programs and any questions that we didn't answer on today's broadcast. Thank you very much for joining this edition of the Middle East Forum's Iran War Monitor broadcast on June 18th, 2025. We'll see you tomorrow.